Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. For anyone that's new here, my name's OwenAlec, and on this channel I do everything drum related. That includes drum covers, tutorials, gear reviews, tips and advice just like this one. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, then please do consider subscribing, hit the like button, all that good stuff, because it really helps the channel. Thank you very much. So today on this video, I'm going to be sharing with you some tips on drum sharing etiquette. Whether you're using someone else's gear or you're using your own gear, these are some tips that are really going to help the day go smoother. So I will be splitting this video into two parts. One if you're using someone else's gear, and another if you're using your own gear. But stick around to the end because I've got an idea for you guys relating to this, and I want to know your opinion. So let's kick this off if you're using someone else's gear. Tip number one would be just respect their gear. It seems like an obvious one, but the amount of gigs I've played where people just don't give a shit about my gear, and it really is frustrating because I've spent a lot of money, time and effort on making my gear as good as it can be, so when I am using it for other gigs and other people are using it, then I want people to respect it. It's pretty simple really. I promise you, treating someone else's gear with respect goes a long way. And if you decide to do another gig with that same band at a later date, they're going to remember that and they're going to look forward to having you on the same bill. Tip number two would be to find out what they are supplying before the gig. Don't just turn up and expect there to be a bunch of stands and hardware and there's not, because then you've got to go off home and get yours. I've been to so many gigs where I've turned up and I've been promised hardware and has been non-supplied. It's incredibly frustrating when you're told that something's going to be supplied and it's not. That way you've got to go all the way home, which could be miles away, to get your stuff, come back, and then this is time out of your set or your sound check or your setup time, whatever it might be. And just little things like that puts a real dampener on the evening. So checking beforehand, either with the promoter or the person who's supplying the kit, what they're actually bringing and what they're going to be supplying will really help you and the entire evening run smoothly. Number three is a big one. Ask before altering anything. This is something that I've always done, even from being a starter drummer and just doing our first gigs. Anytime I was using someone else's gear, I asked before I could move anything. And again, this went a long way. They really appreciated the fact that I asked. I played a gig once at Club Academy in Manchester, and I just bought this brand new Mapex Satin white kit. You may have seen it on some of the really early videos of this channel. I loved this thing. It was my pride and joy. It was the very first kit that I bought with my own money. We were headlining the gig, so I had to supply the drum kit, which was absolutely fine, no problem doing that. I set it up at the gig and the whole thing's looking absolutely majestic. I was super proud of it. I then went off to get some food with the rest of my bandmates, came back, and one of the bands that was on, which actually was a band from Italy, was sound checking. And I thought, oh right, okay, they must be just using my kit as they would normally do, sort of thing, no problem. I walk into the room and the drummer has put my toms touching my bass drum and he's whacking the hell out of them. I physically had to stop their sound check. I screamed at him, pulled him off the drum kit and lifted my tom up so it was in a right position. I almost said that they weren't able to use my gear, but saner minds prevailed. I ended up letting him use my kit, but wow, I was mad that day because this is a kit that I'd spent a lot of money on and it was my pride and joy. I wanted people to look after it. So if they'd have caught me before I went out for food or they waited until I got back to just ask me if I could, if they could move things, and I would have even been there, I would have helped to move things around so it suited them. But no, they took it upon themselves to just move it wherever they want, and the inexperience of them showed because it makes me cringe even thinking about it now. The fact that he had the tom touching the bass drum and there was a little bit of paint chipped away on the top of the bass drum and it was there until they got rid of the kit. So yeah, just ask, please, just ask. But this also goes for things like tuning. Now, I did a gig a couple of years ago with a band I was playing with for a short while called Jidge, and we were playing at Gulliver's in Manchester. And I think the band that was supplying the kit weren't actually the headliner. I think they were the main support. And it was a Pearl Vision kit. They're not very good kits. They're not terrible, but they're not great. But the quality of the kit is kind of irrelevant. It was the fact that the drum heads themselves were actually pretty loose and you could see ripples and things like that. And I thought, I'm not playing a kit with rippled heads because it's going to sound like ass. And that's not a very good representation of this band. You know, we need something that's going to sing back at me, and I wanted the toms to ring out. So I give them a quick tune. I couldn't find the guy. I actually did ask, by the way. I asked the guy if, I went to find the guy if I could change anything, and he was nowhere to be found. And we were due on in like 5 minutes. So I had to take it upon myself, unfortunately, on that one, to change things around. Now, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I've been doing this for a long time. I've been tuning drums. I do it as a living. You know, I own a music shop. I do this for a living. I know what I'm doing when it comes to tuning drums. Now, obviously, this guy didn't know that. So after the gig, someone had told him that I tuned the kit. And he came up to me afterwards and was like, "You really shouldn't tune someone else's kit." But then when I tried to explain to him what the problem was, he just wasn't receptive at all, and I don't know what he did for the rest of their set because I had to leave. So yeah, he might have tuned them back so that they were rippled, but they sounded horrible. And on this occasion, I think tuning the kit, if you really know what you're doing, it's not so bad. But where you can, ask before altering anything. Anytime I've had to do that in the past, I have always asked and I've always got permission before I did anything. Changing placements of toms, cymbals, arms, tunings, anything like that, ask. Tip number 4 is to be flexible with the placements, because essentially it's not your kit, it's not your setup, and you've got to be able to adapt to whatever kit that you're given. So I've played gigs before where I've been given a 1-up 1-down kit, or I've had 5 or 6 piece kit, which is really nice to have, but I don't need a Mike Portnoy style kit for the type of stuff I was doing at that time. But it was nice to have. And then when I had to then transpose that onto a 1-up 1-down kit, it was a lot more difficult, but I was still able to do it. Equally, if you're borrowing someone else's gear that's got a lot of toms and they're all in very specific places, you don't really want to move them because they've taken a lot of time to get them in a position that works for them. And at the end of the day, if they're headlining and you're using their kit, you're just a support act. You've got to learn to adapt and change your playing style ever so slightly to the style of someone else's kit. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not able to move things at all. Again, if you ask, you might be able to move things around so a little bit more comfortable for you, but you've got to be prepared to not be able to move things, but still play your set. And then tip number 5, leave it as you found it. Now, if you've moved things, try your best to move them back. But if you found it in a good condition, like there's no dents or cracks or anything like that, then leave it in good condition when you're taking your gear off stage. Just take a bit of care, and let's go back to number 1, respect other people's gear. You take a bit of care when you're taking either your snare off, you're not catching the toms, or if you're moving a cymbal or something like that, or you're taking your stick bag off, you're not letting the floor tom fall over, which again, it has happened to me. I remember on my North Custom kit, I took out once, someone did that. They took the tom off because they were only using the floor tom, and then they put that on the side, and then as they were putting it over there, they caught the floor tom and it went over. And again, this is a really expensive drum kit, and I just had to remind people just to be careful. Okay, now let's move on to if you're supplying the gear. A lot of the stuff from before does apply, just kind of the opposite way around, but let's just go over some other points. Tip number 1 and tip number 2 kind of go hand in hand. First off, you've got to decide what it is that you're going to let other people use, and then number 2 is tell them about it. Good communication on this part is really key, because if you tell the promoter or you let the other drummers know either in a group chat or in an email or wherever it might be, then they know what's being supplied, they know what to bring, and again, that communication allows for a really smooth transition throughout the evening. Equally, you might get an email back from one of the band members saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have such an item, can I borrow it from you?" In that case, a lot of the time, when that has happened to me, I've been pretty receptive to that. I'm like, yeah, you know what, thank you very much for asking. I've got a spare one of these that I can lend you, either a cheaper version of whatever it might be, a cymbal or a snare drum or sticks. I have lent out stuff like that before, and I always appreciate it if someone comes to me beforehand and says, "Can I borrow these things?" Tip number 3 is going back to something from the first section, where you've got to be flexible when it comes to placements. I understand that it's your kit and you want it the way you want it. You don't really want people messing with it. I get that. I've had it so many times. But being flexible with other people and allowing them to just move it and customize it just a little bit to the way that they want it so it's more comfortable for them will go a long way, and they'll really appreciate that, or at least they should. A good trick with this is to have memory clamps. That way, if someone else moves it and changes things like the height of toms or the positioning or whatever it might be, you can then put them back relatively quickly if you've got memory clamps, because you know exactly where everything's supposed to be. Tip number 4 is be prepared for the sponge. I mentioned before about people messaging you and asking to borrow gear. That's absolutely fine. When you get to the gig, and there's people saying, oh, I forgot to bring my sticks, or I forgot to bring my snare, or I forgot whatever it might be. It's like, you're supposed to do a checklist. I have forgotten things before in the past, and I've been incredibly humble and had to go and ask for stuff. But when it's things like sticks, which is super basic stuff, a seat, your cymbals, your snare drum, your other breakables, these are the things that you're supposed to bring in the first place. And I remember playing one gig in particular, and it was actually a friend of mine who was supporting with his band, and he didn't bring anything. He'd just come straight from work and he didn't bring anything at all. He just assumed that he was able to borrow everyone else's gear. I had to bail him out and I had to lend him all of my gear for that gig, and to my absolute dismay, I saw him thrashing the hell out of my cymbals. These were Sabians at the time as well, just smacking the hell out of my snare. He was hitting them way harder than he needed to do, and after I got off stage, I didn't scream at him or anything like that. I just politely told him that he's not borrowing my stuff ever again. But this is it. Sometimes I have actually brought spare things to a gig because I know that someone is going to want to borrow it, like it's spare sticks or whatever it might be. And you get into a habit of having these spares anyway for yourself, but then if someone else needs to borrow them, you're the guy that saves the day. And promoters like that as well. And it has been noticed before where I've lent out gear to either one or even two bands on the same bill, and the promoter has invited my band back because they know that we're easy to work with. And tip number 5 is to check your gear after each band has used it. You might have 5 bands on the bill, you being the 5th one, and that means 4 bands before you, and each one might leave the kit in a different condition. You don't want the first band to absolutely destroy your drum kit and you don't know about it, and then you blame the 4th band because you get to it after their set and you're like, well, why is everything broken, or why is this snapped off, or why has this got a crack in it? And then you don't know who to, well, blame, I suppose. Just taking 30 seconds to scan your kit, either from the side of the stage or if you can get up on stage and just have a quick look. It may look like you're being, overly protective, but if this is gear that you've spent a lot of money on, I think other drummers will understand. So lastly, I want to share an idea with you that a friend of mine actually joked about years and years ago when we were doing a gig. And I actually thought about it, and it's possible to turn this into a proper idea. What if, when someone is hiring out the gear, that they actually take a small deposit off the other drummers so that if something does go wrong, they've got the money there to settle it straight off. Now, of course, there's going to be loads of discrepancies here that you would need to iron out beforehand, either making everyone aware of it or really think about the entire process entirely so that there's it's completely airtight, there's no leaks or anything like that that someone could take advantage of or someone else is going to get really upset about. But I wanted to hear what you guys think of this. Is this actually something that could be viable where someone who is providing the kit takes a small deposit, gives it back at the end if there is nothing wrong, but if something does go wrong, like a head goes through, or they notice that there's some chipping on the paint that wasn't there before, and again, they'd have to be able to prove this, that it was actually that person, either them playing the kit irresponsibly, etc. But do you think it could be a good idea? Let me know in the comment sections below, and also let me know if this is something that you would actually go along with yourself. But that's it for this video. I hope you guys have got something out of it. If there's anything that I've missed, please leave it in the comment sections below. Thank you very much again, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.